Perfect. So, welcome and good morning or good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining us. I am Catalina Lopez. I am the director of the Aquatic Animal Alliance, and I am also a veterinarian certified in aquatic species. And the Aquatic Animal Alliance, with our partner Animal Law Focus, invited you all to join us today because we believe a clear understanding of the latest scientific evidence on fish sentience really is essential for advancing aquatic animal welfare policies. And as evidence accumulates on the cognitive and emotional capabilities of fishes and their corresponding welfare needs, it really becomes increasingly important to translate this knowledge into practical applications that can guide standards of care, inform regulations, and support more responsible management across all sectors that interact with aquatic animals. And so science really is a crucial pillar of our work at Aquatic Life Institute. And we believe that for veterinarians and scientists, having clarity on sentience research allows for more accurate welfare assessments, the development of the interventions for kind of those welfare aspects that can reflect that biological and behavioral reality of each of these species in the aquaculture industry. And so for advocates and policymakers, it really provides the empirical foundation that we need to really advance credible and effective welfare improvements. And so today we are joined by Professor Lynne Sneddon from the University of Gothenburg, who will present the current state of scientific understanding on fish sentience and its implications for research, aquaculture policy, etc. Her pioneering work has been central in demonstrating that fishes experience pain and display complex behavior that indicate learning and emotion. And this evidence has shaped international discussions and policies on welfare standards and continues to influence academic and regulatory approaches. And so, with that, I give the floor to Professor Sneddon. And for those who are on camera, remember we're recording. So, just FYI, if you're not comfortable, just turn off your camera.
Thank you very much, Catalina. It's a really wonderful introduction. I'm absolutely honored to be here talking to you today, along with everyone else in the audience. Thank you. I'm going to be talking about the science surrounding sentience in fishes and then how we can try and understand the implications of using fish in a variety of different contexts. How can we actually improve their welfare in those contexts? I lead the Aquatic Animal Welfare group at the University of Gothenburg, and we work on fishes, decapod crustaceans, and cuttlefish. And so I'm really pleased to be talking and focusing on fishes today. So I'm going to talk about defining sentience so we all understand what it actually means. Then talk about the myths that are often used when we discuss fishes with the general public. There's lots of myths surrounding fish. Then I'm going to show you some evidence for sentience in fishes and talk about the major welfare challenges that surround the use of fishes in aquaculture, fisheries, pet fish, angling or recreational fishing, and of course in science. And then tell you a bit about what I've done to try and promote the improved welfare of fishes in a variety of different contexts and also give you some inspiration for what you can do to try and promote fish welfare. So let's start by defining sentience, and we can consider an animal to be sentient if it has some ability to do some of the following things. And I've underlined some. And the reason for that is we mustn't be anthropomorphic. We mustn't expect fish to be like us. Fish have a very different life history, ecology, and evolution, live in a very different world to us. So we have to think that they have some capacity to do some of these things. And these things are the ability to form relationships within their own species with each other, but also relationships with other species. They should have some form of cognitive ability, the ability to learn new skills and remember those skills. They should be able to make adaptive decisions based upon the pros and cons of any situation and make a behavioral decision that is good for them. They should also be able to experience both positive and negative emotional states or affective states. And so positive would be perhaps contentedness, negative would be pain, fear, or stress. And they should also be affected by other states. So we call that empathy in humans, and in animals, we call it emotional contagion. Are they affected by seeing another animal in good welfare or poor welfare? There also should be some evidence of self-awareness or consciousness. And so the animal should be able to recognize itself distinct from others. And so we can take each of these, and I can show you some evidence for each of these criteria to determine whether fishes are actually sentient. But there are many myths surrounding fishes, so I hope you're going to join me on this journey to bust some of these myths wide open. And the first myth is that fishes are stimulus response robots that are unable to form relationships, that they are unintelligent and have a very poor memory. And I'm sure you've all heard of the goldfish 3-second memory, and that they cannot experience pain or have any sort of emotions. So we're going to bust these myths in this seminar. So let's start off with forming relationships. And I'm going to show you an example of a study on rabbit fishes. These are coral reef fish, and they behave in a way that shows they are very effective at communicating with each other. They signal and behave in a way that is mutually beneficial for each other within these species. And these are the rabbit fishes here. And what you can see is they live in pairs. And you can see that one of the pair is looking up, it's being vigilant, it's looking for predators, whereas the other member of the pair is looking down and is actually foraging in the coral. And so one looks for predators and one looks for food. And in this pair, they're actually able to communicate their intentions, they signal to one another, and they precisely match each other's behavior. And this is called direct reciprocity. And this is very rare in mammals and birds, but here we see it in a fish. I'm going to show you a video here of the pair. You can see them in the middle there. One is looking up, the other is feeding. Then they signal to one another and they change roles. And this is good for them because they can penetrate much deeper into the coral, into the crevices, and they can feed for longer. And so this behavior benefits both fish. And here's another benefit. You can see the fish, they're doing the thing, and suddenly they scatter and hide. And that's because a predator is coming by. And so they actually are acting beneficially for each other. What about relationships between species? And there is a very famous one, the grouper fish and the moray eel, and they cooperate during hunting. And so again, I'm going to show you some videos of this. So the grouper comes along to the moray eel's home and basically asks it, do you want to go hunting? They go off together and you can see the moray eel's long tail behind the grouper. So they swim off to look for prey animals. The grouper then signals to the moray eel, its head down, it's shaking its head, and it signals that there are prey. And the moray eel, with its long body, can get into those crevices and flush the prey out. And they share the spoils of this hunting relationship, and they are more successful when they hunt together. So that this relationship is mutually beneficial. There are other species that fishes can form relationships with, for example, an octopus, so it's not even a fish. And here you can see some coral reef fishes are hunting with the octopus. When they hunt together again, they are more successful together. Here's the goby forming a very close relationship with a pistol shrimp, a decapod crustacean. And they live together in a burrow like flatmates, and they effectively have different roles. So the goby provides food and cover and predator avoidance. It looks for predators, whereas the shrimp is the cleaner. It cleans the burrow, it clears of all the detritus and eats. So the shrimp gets a place to live, it gets food, and the goby gets a very clean burrow to live in. So again, mutually beneficial relationship. And so we busted that myth. Fish can form relationships within their own species and even between other species, not just with fish, but with octopus and shrimp. So, what about cognitive ability? Do fishes have the ability to think deeply about what they're doing? And one of the key criteria for being sentient is being able to use tools. And here we have the tusk fish. It feeds on these shelled bivalves. And what it does is it throws the shell against rocks. So it uses the rock as a tool to crack open these hard-shelled animals. And here you can see the tusk fish here. It picks up the shell and it throws it against the rock to crack it open. So we have tool use. What about being able to remember different faces, for example, different things? Here we have the archer fish. This is a really interesting freshwater fish that spits at insects and the canopy above it to knock them into the water and then it eats them. Well, this study used this ability, but instead of insects, it showed the archerfish different faces. And when it picked the right face, when it spat the right face, it got a reward. And the study found that archerfish can remember up to 44 different human faces and can even remember them when they're turned to the side. And so this is an amazing feat. And here's a video just to show you this in action. The fish spits at the right face and then gets a food reward. And so being able to remember up to 44 different faces is pretty amazing. Here it goes again, spits at the right face and gets a reward. Here's another example, and it's quite a feat to be able to differentiate different shades of color. And in this case, the Picasso triggerfish was trained to pick the darkest shade of this color. And then it got a reward. And so here's another video of the animal doing this. The animal's in a start area, it's allowed access, and it goes immediately and picks the darkest shade and gets a reward. Now, the study also looked at very closely matched shades, and still the triggerfish was able to pick the darkest. Even when you move the shade to a different area, the triggerfish can still pick the darkest shade. And that shows that they can discern between very closely related shades and learn and remember this task. What about being able to make adaptive decisions based on the pros and cons of any situation? And here we go to the cleaner fish. This is a very interesting species. The cleaner fish forms cleaning stations on coral reefs and it gets predator fish coming in to be cleaned. And basically the cleaner fish eat off any parasites and debris. But the client fish's skin is actually more nutritious. So occasionally the cleaner fish will bite the client. Um, and so what happens when the cleaner cl and client are together? Will it bite the client if it doesn't think it's being watched? So we have a bystander here, which the cleaner fish can't see, or when it is actually being watched. So this is a potential new client. And what the study found was that cleaners are less likely to bite if they had an audience, and it's because they want to safeguard their reputation. They want other new clients and they don't want to bite their clients in front of a potential new client. So here we busted another myth. Fish are intelligent beings and they do have cognitive abilities which are complex. What about affective states or emotional states? We can try and find out if they have positive emotions. So again, we turn our attention to the cleaner fish. And in this study, the researchers built a model cleaner fish and they had brushes attached to it and they moved that model. And then they looked to see whether the clients, these surgeon fish, would actually voluntarily seek out a massage from the brushes. And in fact, that's what you can see here in this video. The surgeonfish lines itself up and voluntarily engages with this model and gets a massage. And when the researchers took blood samples from these fish, they found that the stress hormone cortisol was much lower in fish which received a massage compared to those that didn't. So again, this massage had a calming effect on the fish. What about the negative affective state? In my group have worked on this question of whether fishes are capable of experiencing pain. And we've looked at a variety of different species and we've done a comprehensive set of studies. What I'm going to show you is a video of a control fish, which is they're completely undisturbed and behaving normally. And then I'm going to show you fishes which have been subject to a treatment in the laboratory, which is done under anesthesia, but involves tissue damage and so would give rise to pain. I do apologize if any of you are offended. Please look away and please don't watch. So this is a pair of zebrafish in the laboratory. These fish are, settled, they're normal, they're interacting with each other, they're moving constantly. But what happens when you take one of these fish and anesthetize it and perform a fin clip? This is where part of the tail fin is removed, and that's done routinely for genomic screening, done under anesthesia, but usually no pain relief is given. So you can see the fish that's been clipped is sitting on the bottom, so part of its tail fin has been removed. It's not interacting with the other fish, it's not moving. And this really is a pain-related response because when we give this fish pain-relieving drugs, it behaves normally. We can also look at groups of fish. In this case, we have a group of zebrafish. Again, this is their normal behavior. They swim around all the time, interact with one another. However, when you painfully treat one of them, and this is a fish which has had 10% acetic acid injected into its lips, this is a standard pain test. It's like getting vinegar in a cut. You can see this fish is very immobile. It's not interacting with the others. And again, if we give the animal pain-relieving drugs, we see normal behavior. What about the impact of other states? So we call this empathy. When you see someone who's happy, you feel happier. When you see if they're sad, we feel sad. And in animals, we call this emotional contagion. So this particular study looked at fear contagion in zebrafish again. And what they did was they held demonstrator fish in one tank, and next door they had observer fish who were watching the demonstrators. And the demonstrators were either familiar to the observer fish or unfamiliar. And they looked at fear. And what you do is you add an alarm substance to the tank, and that causes a fear response. So the animals freeze. They're basically frozen with fear. So what you can see here is the demonstrators before, that's their normal behavior, very little to no freezing. Then you can add water as a blank here in blue and nothing much happens. And then you can add this fear-causing stimulus, the alarm substance, and you get a dramatic increase in freezing behavior here in orange. If we look at observers, now nothing is done to the observers. They don't experience either the water or the alarm substance. You can see when water's added, there's no freezing. But when they're watching demonstrators responding to a fear cue, they start freezing, even though they're not exposed to that alarm cue. And that shows that the animals are able to see the state of another and then alter their behavior. And we call that fear contagion. So we busted another myth. Fish can experience emotional states, both positive and negative. What about consciousness or self-awareness? And the gold standard for this is the mirror recognition test. And what you do is you put a mirror in front of the animal many times, and then you put something on the animal. And if it attempts to remove that that thing that you put on it, then it recognizes itself and knows there's something on it. And this is exactly what they did again with the wonderful cleaner fish. They basically showed the cleaner fish the mirror, and then they placed a red dot on the throat of the cleaner fish, and then the cleaner fish sought to rub that off by rubbing its throat against the substrate. And here we have the cleaner fish performing throat scraping. So it sees itself with the red dot and it then seeks to remove that red dot. So there it goes, throat scraping. Now, critics of this argue that this is just a physical stimulus on the throat, a mechanical, the placing of the red dot. It's an irritation, and so the should, it's not actually the animal recognizing itself. So the researchers performed another experiment where they actually showed the cleaner fish an image of itself with a red dot. So there's no red dot on the fish, but it sees itself with a red dot. And what you can see here is the responses that the animal makes. So it sees itself with a red dot. There's nothing on the animal. And again, once it sees itself with a red dot, it performs throat scraping to get rid of that red dot. So the cleaner fish does recognize itself in the mirror recognition test. So again, we've busted another myth. Fish are not unfeeling automated robots. They're not stimulus response. There is a lot of empirical evidence, scientific evidence that these animals are sentient, they have relationships, they can learn and remember, they make adaptive decisions, and they can experience both positive and negative emotions, and there is evidence for self-awareness. And so we then can think about what are the implications of this when we use fishes in a variety of different contexts. Just to say that I've only touched on a very small number of examples. If you're interested in this, Don Broom's book is wonderful and covers all animals. Myself and Colin Brown wrote about this extensively in this book on neuroethics and non-human animals. And so there is many, many more examples of how wonderful fish are and how sentient they are. So let's turn our attention to the wider implications that this has. We farm huge numbers of fish to try and meet the demands for protein for our growing populations. We catch something like 1 trillion fish every year in fisheries. Many people like to go and catch fish as a recreation, a sport. We call it angling or catch and release. And actually, fish are the third most popular pet behind cats and dogs. We also pay a lot of money to go and visit public aquaria. And fish are an exceptionally important scientific model. We use them in science. And in all of these contexts, there are things that we do to fish that could cause tissue damage and give rise to pain. Not only that, we can cause them stress, fear, and so we need to think about how can we improve their welfare in these situations. So I'm going to take each of these in turn and talk about what the issues are and then what we can do to try and improve the situation for the fish. Now, as a scientist myself, this is what I do. I communicate to the public, and when we have science that shows that fishes are sentient, that they experience pain, that we should really be doing something to improve that situation. So this is me writing for The Guardian. This is an article I wrote with colleagues in a Swedish newspaper, so that the general public is aware of the science. In aquaculture, I also engage with charities, and this is Compassionate World Farming, and this is Scrap Factory Farming. So both of these campaign for the better treatment of fish. However, there are many welfare challenges in fish farming and aquaculture, and given all the scientific evidence, it is time that we started considering the welfare of animals. Now, many of you may know that the conditions that the animals are kept in vary greatly from the hatchery. This is where the eggs are produced, to the juvenile stage, and then the on-growing stage, and then broodstock, which are used to provide sperm and eggs. And so there are very different conditions for each of these stages of keeping fish. This is the rainbow trout typical production cycle. So we really do need more information on the age-specific needs or requirements. But there are a high number of issues that are challenging for the fish. For example, water quality is key to good fish welfare. We still don't know what is the correct stocking density for many species and different types of farms. There are scientists now looking at implementing enrichment in fish farms to improve welfare. We often fast the animal or starve them prior to transport, for example, or before we kill them in slaughter. Many animals are slaughtered alive. So now we're promoting the use of a stunning technique before killing, so the animal's unconscious. The animals are transported for long periods. Vaccination can be an issue where we get high mortality. Some of the species that we farm are aggressive, and so we have to handle them and size grade them to try and reduce that aggression. Because of climate change, we're seeing incidences of painful sunburn in animals which are held in the natural environment, and the increasing temperatures are an exceptional challenge for these cold-blooded animals. And then, of course, the animals are subject to necrotic and damaging diseases and parasites, which could be painful. So all of these issues are really things that we need to be focusing on to try and improve the experience for the fish. And I've written extensively on this and talked to journalists, and I'm going to focus on humane slaughter. What we want to do is be stunning the animal like we do with terrestrial farm animals, and then kill them while they're unconscious using an effective method. And we do that either by percussive stunning. This is where a captive bull, the animal's hit on the head above the brain and it knocks the animal unconscious, or we use electric shock to stun the animals. And I worked with Cynthia Shook-Paim at the Welfare Footprint Institute and many colleagues, and we looked at the welfare impact of just holding trout in air prior to killing them without using stunning. And we found that fish can suffer for up to 22 minutes, and they could be exposed to excruciating, disabling, hurtful, or annoying pain during that time. And we calculated the cost of employing a stunning method prior to killing to avoid this asphyxia, being held in air where the animal is suffocating. And really, this can be employed at a very cheap cost to improve the welfare of fish. And so I worked with charities such as Animal Equality and the Humane League to, for example, improve the welfare of rainbow trout at the time of slaughter. And this report was presented to the United Kingdom government. How can we improve the welfare of fishes in aquaculture? Well, there are a number of certification schemes. And this table here was produced by the Aquatic Life Institute. I think they're going to update it soon. But it scored each of the schemes out of 10 and on their welfare standards. And so certification schemes can raise standards. It can have stocking densities. It can have uh, information about how the fish are treated, how they're kept. And that can raise the way that we can keep the fish. However, these certification schemes are very expensive, and so it's only really the large aquaculture companies that can afford them. And really, there has to be an increased economic return so that we are buying better welfare, and we have to expect that then we have to pay more for fishes in that case. But if governments are not going to bring in legislation, I would say really they should subsidize these certification schemes for fish farms and provide the financial backing so that we can then raise welfare in that way. Let's move on to welfare challenges and fisheries. And in particular, we catch the animals from the wild and then we bring them typically on board a ship and then we kill them. But there are a number of issues. For example, catching too many fish. There are destructive methods which damage the habitat, which of course reduces sustainability. There is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. There are welfare harms in capture, and you can see that here in this figure. So we have capture, and the animals are crowded, they're crushed into nets, they're tired because the trawl can last for hours, they can be injured, they're then retrieved. So they're brought up from depth, and their swim bladders can burst, they're suddenly in a different temperature, they're exposed to light, they can be crushed. Then they're on board. We get them onto the ship. They can be crowded again, and all of these stressors that they're exposed to. And then we have stunning and slaughter. And of course, there are cases where the animals are live gutted or just killed on ice. And really, we should be promoting a much more welfare-friendly approach. There is a general lack of welfare standards and laws and guidelines, and that's an area that we really need to improve. I wrote a piece with Dave Wolfenden in 2012 about the impact of large-scale fisheries on fish welfare. And this See the Truth book predicted that the oceans will be empty because of overfishing. You can see here in this picture these animals. You can see this animal has no head; it's been ripped off. The animals are damaged in the trawl, and we can also see that there are species that are caught that are called bycatch, and these are just left to die on board the ship and then return to the environment. I must say that things have greatly improved, and there is research now trying to improve the experience for the fish, but it is still an issue that there is a significant impact on the animals that we really need to look at, and we also need to be thinking about avoiding bycatch or actually eating this protein, which is effectively being lost. How do we do that? Well, we can work with colleagues. For example, we produced a report for the Humane Slaughter Association, which was again given to the UK government and to the industry. How can we humanely kill these animals on board ships? And so again, we were promoting the use of stunning methods before the animals are killed. Many fishes are landed alive, and of course, in countries where people can't afford refrigeration, often aquatic species are sold alive. This is Hong Kong. It was incredibly hot, and this was just in a street. So these are fish, and you can see the water is murky and foamy, and the fish are gasping at the surface. There are air stones in here, so the seller is providing air to the fish, but these are really bad conditions for the fish, and so really we need to be thinking about how can we improve this, but. I do accept that in many countries, people can't afford refrigeration, and so that this is their only option is to buy the animals alive. However, this is incredibly stressful, and these animals look terrible. This is a practice that I saw in Taiwan. These fish are alive and they're sitting out of water and they're bound up alive. And this is a very unnatural position. They're struggling for air, and this can last for up to 8 to 12 hours. And they finally die of suffocation or they're unbound after this period and slaughtered for sale. But this practice, it really causes a lot of pain and stress, and we should really be investigating ways of stunning and killing these animals quickly so that they do not suffer. How can we make a difference? Well, we really need to be thinking about shifting to sustainable fishing methods, try to reduce overfishing, and avoid methods that cause habitat destruction. So when we buy fish, we should think about how were they caught. We should also be working towards better welfare standards. So we should campaign with our local politicians that they are developing ways or legislation or guidelines that the animals are handled in a better way and that they're killed in a humane way. Uh, Climate change poses a great risk to sustainable fisheries and to the animals, so we should be tackling climate change. And we should also be promoting awareness among the general public, retailers, producers, and policymakers about fish welfare to try and drive this change. We do need research into better ways of catching fish and better ways of handling them and killing them when we do catch them. Let's move our attention on to recreational fishing, also called sport fishing or angling. People do this as a hobby or they do it as a sport. And so this is the individual going out and catching fish. And of course, this involves hooking. So the animals can be hooked and suffer damage, which would give rise to pain and also mortality because the procedure is stressful. They can be exhausted. Uh, they're subject to rapid environmental changes like temperature, light, and so on. Um, they can experience mortality and suffering. and definitely stress and distress at the whole procedure. There are many animals which can escape and we don't know what happens to them. And we can think about catch and kill. So some people will catch the animal and kill it quickly and humanely, and then they'll take it home to feed their family. Versus catch and release is what when people catch fish and then they release them back into the wild and the hope that they survive and that makes the population sustainable. But that's not always the case. Now, I've written quite extensively on how to improve the way that we catch fish. This review here, we actually propose that we should be using knotless nets, barbless hooks, so that the animal is in better condition. And I've also worked with the Norwegian Scientific Committee for Food Safety on a risk assessment, and again, promoting much better ways of doing this so that the impact on the fish is reduced. Some countries, like Germany, have banned catch and release angling. This was me interviewed in 2017 for a documentary. Unfortunately, people are still doing this illegally in Germany. This was 2017. And then last year, I was interviewed again by another company in Germany. And unfortunately, it's illegal catch and release is still going on. It's sad that this is still happening, but it is banned in Germany. So, how can we make a difference? How can we improve welfare? Well, we do need more research on the effect that this has on the fish. When they're injured, this will give rise to pain. How can we reduce the stress? And does catch and release actually harm populations or improve sustainability? We really need to look at the long-term effects on fish populations. We should promote responsible angling practices and we should work with people who do this and try and educate them in using the best practice, uh, barbless hooks, minimize the length of time it takes to catch the animal, the length of time it's out in the air, and how to carefully release the fish so that the fish is in good condition after this angling experience. But we do need to be very sensitive. People get very upset about that, and we should balance the interests of humans with the welfare of the fish. And so it's important that we have ethical discussions and work with uh, policy providers and regulatory bodies and with the anglers. We're working together because the anglers want to have healthy fish to catch, and we want the welfare of the fish to be good. So we should work together. Now, let's move on to using fishes in the laboratory. We use a huge number of fish. Fish have become the second most used model across Europe. So we use more fish than rats in experiments now in Europe, and that's becoming a global phenomenon. We use them in a wide variety of different experimental fields, and we're using huge numbers of fishes in these experiments. And many of these experiments do involve procedures that give rise to pain. They are damaging. And so it's important that we tackle this. But many of the other issues that I highlight for aquaculture, keeping these animals in captivity, water quality, what do they need in their tanks, enrichment, are we giving them the right food? Are we keeping them in the right stocking density? This is all very important for the welfare of laboratory fishes. My laboratory looks at many of these questions. One of those is really to promote good welfare practices, and we've spent quite a lot of time assessing pain, being able to recognize it and alleviate it in laboratory fishes. And what we did is we developed an automated artificial intelligence software tool that can accurately gauge the health of fishes. And then we used that tool to test a range of immersion pain relieving drugs. So we basically add the pain relieving drug to the water, and that provides pain relief. But of course, prior to this, we really didn't know which drugs were effective and at what dose. And so what we did is we monitored laboratory zebrafish in different conditions. We monitored control undisturbed healthy fish. Fish which were sham handled, this means they were anesthetized, but nothing was done to them. And then which were anesthetized and subject to routine laboratory procedures. Fin clipping, where part of the tail fin is removed for genomic screening. Pit tagging, this is when a small tag is inserted through the abdomen of the fish. And muscle damage during surgery. And then we compared that to a standard pain test. Again, this is injection of acetic acid just under the skin. And that's a validated pain test in other animals, including humans. And so we looked at these. They were all done under anesthesia, so the animal's unconscious, but then the animal is allowed to recover, and then that's when it can experience pain. And what we did is we mapped the behavior of the fish. And what you can see here, the fish is being tracked from above and from the side. And so we can get 3D mapping of zebrafish behavior. And we get that 3D mapping in real time. And we can automate the analysis so we can get information on the speed of swimming, distance travel. These are things that we can't measure by eye. So we measured 20 different parameters. And this is what the data looks like. These are 3D diagrams of the tank. So this is a rendering of the tank space. And this is 2 hours after the experiment has started. And this is 25 minutes of behavior. So these dots represent where the fish is. The green dots are slow swimming, red dots are fast swimming, and these are control animals, so using all of the tank space. And then if we look at sham-handled animals, they are anesthetized, but nothing's done to them. We can see it's using most of the space, so very similar. However, when you fin clip, insert a pit tag, cause muscle damage, or use acetic acid, the behavior is very, very different. So this is 25 minutes. These animals are largely sitting on the bottom of the tank and they're not moving as much. And so this is classic pain-related behavior. We can then use a range of drugs which provide pain relief, analgesics, and see whether they prevent that change in behavior. So these are all fin-clipped fish, and we can see lidocaine here dissolved in the tank water and prevents the change in behavior. And then we have another drug here. This is flunixin, 8 milligrams per liter. That prevents the response, as does morphine at 48 milligrams per liter. Lower doses were not effective, and this drug here, bupivacaine, at 1 milligram per liter was not effective. And so very much like us, when we take painkillers, the pain goes away. The same with the zebrafish here. And this, we developed this tool where you can see this fish is being tracked. This is the health index. This fish is normal. And then we paused it and then we fin clipped it and its behavior is coming up as abnormal. And this would allow us to intervene and provide pain relief so that the animal can then have its welfare improved. And we've published this and it's freely available. We call it the Fish Behavior Index. And we've also produced a group in software for groups of fish. And all of that work, not just from my lab, but from other labs across the world, has identified drugs like aspirin, ibuprofen, morphine, lidocaine, and we now have drugs, we know what dose to give them at and what route to give them. And so we can use this in the laboratory to prevent pain. And that's exactly what we've done for the Federation of European Laboratory Science Association, FLASA. We now say analgesia, pain relief, should be used in all procedures that cause tissue damage unless you're studying pain itself. And so we are implementing what are called the 3Rs, and this is a refinement. We improve animal welfare. So how can we make a difference? Well, we can again talk to our local politicians and make sure that we're influencing policy, legislation, and guidelines. We can promote those ethical 3Rs. I'm sure you've heard of them. Replacement, where we use tissues or cells or human tissues or cells or mathematical models rather than fish. We can make sure we're using the minimum number of animals to meet the experimental outcomes. That's reduction. And we can improve welfare. We can now monitor the fish's welfare and we can provide pain relief. And that's a refinement. And we can also use animal-free technologies where they are available and they are practical. So we can avoid using fish altogether. What about the next context, pet fish? And one of the things that can happen, anyone can go and buy a setup and then get fish without any training. And of course, these are very sensitive animals, and you need some information about their environment, the water that they're kept in. Um, you can see the goldfish bowls here. This is a Siamese fighting fish. This is goldfish, of course. Tiny spaces. Some of these animals can be overcrowded. So there can be a lack of enrichment. Of course, we need good water quality. Do we have filtration and aeration? We can have bad handling and transportation. selective breeding for these fancy goldfish. These animals are called bubble eye. They get lots of diseases associated with the eyes and the bubbles. And many keepers just lack knowledge and resources to provide proper care, which leads to poor welfare. And there is generally a lack of training in veterinary issues surrounding fish. Because it's so expensive, many people avoid taking their fish to a vet when they're sick. And so these are the issues that we have surrounding the use of pet fish. And I was very lucky to talk to the British Veterinary Association and the Animal Welfare Foundation in the UK, where we really hashed out what are the challenges. And it is true that we need much more training and education for veterinarians so that they can effectively treat fish. This is an ornamental or pet fish magazine, Practical Fish Keeping, and I spoke to them about the work that I do and did a Q&A with them. And so again, it's about education. And then this is their Facebook page, and they asked, "Do you think fish can feel pain?" And out of 460 people, 96% of people said yes. And so that's great. How do we make a difference? Well, we need to really, again, liaise with politicians and with the industry and really try and put some legislation and guidelines in place and try to develop welfare indicators within that. We need more research. And I would like to see training for owners. Really, owners need to have an understanding of what it means to keep a fish and knowledge of their behavior. And we need improved training for veterinarians. We need much more information. I used to train vets at Liverpool, and I've also provided training to vets across the world on fish welfare. So I think the science is quite clear. Fish are sentient beings, and we should safeguard their welfare. And I think we should apply the same welfare legislation and procedures to fishes that we give to mammals. We should really be promoting ways that improve the welfare of fishes in all the different contexts that I've talked about today. And good welfare benefits the fish, but it also benefits us. We have healthy fish to eat. Healthy fish grow better, they reproduce, they're stress-free, they're disease-free, so that's better for aquaculture. Obviously, we want sustainable populations and fisheries, so we need to keep the fish in a good way so that we can improve sustainability. And of course, we don't want to keep or eat sick fish. So it's important that we are safeguarding the welfare of fish in any context that we use them in. So I'd just like to say thank you very much again to Catalina and the Aquatic Animal Alliance, apologies, Aquatic Animal Alliance, and thank you very much for watching and for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sneddon, for such a comprehensive presentation. And I really appreciate how you take all the complex science you do every day in the lab and, bring it to the language that everyone can understand, which is definitely what we need more of in science. So we do have a few questions, and we have some minutes for that. So the first one is from Vladimir. His question is, Professor Sneddon, in your framework, sentience seems to require a cluster of capacities, relationships, learning, decision-making, even some evidence of self-recognition. But doesn't the mere experience of positive or negative affective states already imply sentience by definition? If an animal can feel valence, isn't that sufficient to classify it as sentient, regardless of its cognitive sophistication?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. It's really interesting. I think when we define sentience, we have to be really careful that we don't reduce it to a way or a definition that is easily passed, because then skeptics of animal welfare will then attack it. And so I think it's good to use a comprehensive definition of sentience and have a list of criteria that we can test experimentally to prove beyond a reasonable doubt these animals are sentient. And I'm quite sure that you can find evidence for most animals, and certainly if you read Don Broom's book, he actually covers all animals in that book, that there are evidence for each of those criteria and all of the animal groups that we investigate. Now, it could be that the science isn't there yet. There could be a species or an animal group where we haven't looked to see whether they form relationships, for example. But just because there's an absence of evidence doesn't mean that it's a no. It's just that the science isn't there yet. So I do agree that an animal being able to experience both positive and negative affective states is vitally important and very strong evidence, certainly with the work I've done on pain. Lots of people say to me, of course fish feel pain, or of course decapod crustaceans experience pain. But unless you go to industry and to government with the science, they will not change anything. You need to have the scientific evidence and you need to have a comprehensive uh, set of criteria that you really people can't argue with. But I do agree. I think if there is evidence for positive and negative, and I think that's very much happening for insects at the moment, that we do have evidence for pain experience. And so it is vitally important. And there is a great focus on pain because if you show an animal suffers, then again, that's very convincing and compelling evidence to protect that animal.
Thank you so much for the response. We have another question by Tessa. Why do the fish tend to stay at the bottom when they're in pain versus near the top? Is it a natural behavior to attempt to hide from predators when they are in pain or weakened?
Yeah, so this is quite complicated. When the fish are held individually, they stay at the bottom, and yes, that is a behavior that signals anxiety and stress. So if you do a simulated predator attack, fish sink to the bottom and stay there, and then will come back up when they feel safe. But yeah, that sinking to the bottom is very much an anxiety response. And of course, when you're in pain, you're anxious and stressed. So, it's quite intuitive that they would do that. However, when they're in groups, and I showed you a video where one of the fish was actually sitting at the top of the tank, when they're in groups, they actually, half of them would sit at the top rather than at the bottom. And we think that's because, when you're in a group, you have other issues. You might not want to look too different from the other animals because then that attracts predators. And so it could be that the animal is trying to avoid looking different. But certainly, if in the groups, we sometimes saw that the animal would sit near the top of the tank. And of course, that's not a good thing. If it was in the natural environment, then the animal would be more likely to be eaten by a predator, if it's an aerial predator. So yeah, I hope I've answered that question, Tessa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have another question here from Shadi. Is there any way to identify and register companion fish, or do you know if there's any regulation aimed at creating a census or registry of pet fish?
No, sadly, is the answer. Unfortunately, there is very, very, very little regulation and legislation surrounding pet fish. And so, anybody can go in and buy a fish and keep it, and we have no idea what happens to that fish. And so that is something that would be a really great idea. Thank you, Shay.
We have another question here. No name. What are your thoughts on the idea that science and research doesn't affect policy?
Yeah, well, I think that really we're funded by public money. People's taxes pay for our science, and it should have implications for the public. It should have value for money. And so I think using science to then influence policy for me is a good thing and shows the public that we're actually doing something that may benefit them. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, Professor Sneddon. We have another question here. How do you respond to a large number of scientists who have provided information and arguments to suggest that fish and invertebrates are not sentients, particularly as no studies have shown that neural signals reaching the brain or a central neural processing center can be processed as affected states, cognition, to interpret these as feelings, suffering, emotions, happiness, pain, that are used to suggest that animals are sentient?
Thanks, David. That's an interesting question. I have to say this, I don't think it is a large number of scientists. I think it's a very small number of skeptical scientists. And you're right, they've only provided opinions and they haven't provided any empirical evidence. We've just finished a review and there are over 80 scientific studies published in international peer-reviewed journals, and the skeptics have not published any, in my opinion, but their latest review did say they published one, but there are problems with that one. So over 80 studies performed all across the world. Um, the weight of evidence versus one is quite clear that there is ample evidence for pain in fish. You've said no studies have shown that neural signals reach the brain. That's not true. We've done magnetic resonance image MRI in fish. We've shown molecular responses. Other people have used electrophysiology, showing that neural signals reach the brain of fishes. In terms of crabs, we've shown that the neural signals reach the central nervous system when you apply painful stimuli. And so that's not the case. Now, what the skeptics do argue is that you must have a human-like cortex to experience pain. So that means no animals except primates might be able to experience pain. So cats, dogs don't experience pain. And they've particularly argued for two areas, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. But actually, studies in humans show when those areas are damaged, those people actually feel pain more. And so actually those areas are not essential for experiencing pain because when they're damaged and no longer functional, the people still experience pain. And so I think the skeptics haven't dealt with these studies though, because obviously their opinion is what it is that you must have a human-like brain. I personally don't agree with that. I think there's ample studies that have shown brain responses. And then I think what you're asking, can we use that to interpret this as feelings? Combined with behavioral and physiological and molecular studies, I think we can suggest internal affective states that are akin to these emotions. And so I personally think if you ask me if a fish experiences pain, I would say I'm 99.99% sure. Of course, I've never been a fish, but I have shown that these animals, when they're in pain, do not show fear responses. They don't show anti-predator behaviors. So pain is very important to them. And that all of that can be reduced by the use of pain relieving drugs. So that's my opinion, David, but thanks for such an interesting question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sneddon, for your response. I know those questions can be interesting to answer
Yeah.
to just ensure that there is clarity on the information that we shared today. There are many more questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time to resolve them today. However, I will follow up with all of you with the recording. And if someone really has a very important question to ask Professor Sneddon, I'm sure she'll be happy to connect with you all. So message me if that's the case. If you all have a moment to fill out the survey that I just posted on the chat on, what the webinar meant for you, how we can improve, all of that, that would be great. I will also send it by email if you prefer. Thank you all for joining us and for being interested in fish sentience. And we will probably have more events like this since all of you are so interested in this topic. Thank you, Professor Sneddon, for your time. Your work is so invaluable for us and for the animal protection movement in general. So we appreciate you and your work so much. And thank you all. Have a great
Thank
rest
you.
of
Thanks
your
for
day.
asking me, and thanks everyone. Take care.